This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abul Samad.
We have not disappeared. It's just been a while. So in the meantime,
it's all Dan's fault.
Yeah, it totally is. I have to say, Wisconsin is lovely this time of year.
There sure are a lot of bugs.
Well, you guys are up. So where's Elkhart Lake in relation to Milwaukee?
It's north of Milwaukee, about an hour and a half north of Milwaukee, I guess.
Okay.
Hour and a half north of Milwaukee. So it's in the northeast corner of Wisconsin. Not as far as Green Bay, but up in that general direction.
Okay. So it was buggy up there?
It certainly was on the roads. I think I posted a picture of the VW Atlas I was driving that week.
Yes.
And it was just coated with bugs.
Yeah.
A lot of mayflies and stuff.
We didn't have quite as much of an issue. We went over to the southwest corner, over by Iowa.
Okay.
And it wasn't quite. Do you know how they have hills there? And
oh, I know. It's amazing.
I was very confused. I was like, no, it's supposed to be flat here. But yeah, no. So most of my miles over the last week were spent in either a 737-700 or a Kia Soul. Which is this is a complete tangent, and it's probably not all that worthwhile to listen to, but I'm going to say it anyway. So the first rental car they tried to give me was this candy colored Fiesta, and the guy at Enterprise was like, "We got that for." I was like, "Nope, I'm all set with the Fiesta. What else do you have?" And he didn't know what to do with that feedback. He paused and was like, "I have the Kia Soul." I was like, "I'll take the Soul. The Soul's fine." And that's a good car to put a couple thousand, or not a couple thousand, but 1,000+ miles on.
Oh yeah, the Soul's a great car. I like it a lot.
It was handy. It was quiet and relaxed. I like it, and I just forgot how much I liked it. So, with that, let's talk about the other cars we're driving. So, what have you been in?
So in the interim, since the last time we talked, I've had a couple of different plug-in vehicles, starting with the Nissan Leaf, the new 2018 Leaf, the second generation, which is mostly new, not entirely new, but we discussed that to some degree back in December. It's basically the same. It's the same platform and the same body structure as the first generation car, which, if you look at it, if you put them side by side, you can see that, the doors are actually carryover, but that's actually the only sheet metal. The doors and I think the roof panel are the only parts that are carryover. But, all the rest of the sheet metal looks much more conventional and kind of fits in with the rest of the Nissan lineup. Now it doesn't look quite as unique, let's put it that way, as the first generation car.
So, hey, how are the panel gaps on the Leaf?
They're good. They're very consistent. Yeah. Nothing out of the ordinary. Pretty much what I would expect of any other, mainstream car built in 2018.
Yeah.
Didn't do any, it kept running, didn't do anything weird.
You didn't feel like a beta tester?
I did not feel like a beta tester. I did, on one day when I was driving back from Detroit, from an event in Detroit, I decided to stop off at a DC fast charging station that's about 10 miles west of here or east of here, just to check out the experience of what it was like to do DC fast charging. And one thing to note, if you're going to buy an EV, even if you're buying a Tesla now, but in general, if you're going to buy an EV, if you're planning on relying on DC fast charging, that's probably not the most economically viable thing to do, because it can be fairly pricey. So, Nissan does have a deal with the Leaf. When you buy a Leaf, they have a deal with EVgo. You do get 2 years of DC fast charging for free. You get 30-minute sessions. But it's a little, it's not not necessarily as convenient as other options, especially if you have home charging. And if you don't, if you're not on one of these subsidized plans, you can also get some like subscription type plans with EVgo and ChargePoint and some of the others, where basically you can prepay for some charging and you get a lower rate. But if you're just doing it a la carte, it can get fairly pricey if you're just looking for a quick charge, because they charge like $5 for a connection fee. and then I think it was about 35 cents a minute after that. And so I plugged in and charged for about 15 minutes and added about 25 miles of range to the car. Which works out to like about 34 cents a mile. I think is what I figured it out as. And, by comparison, our Honda Civic, is in the 20 cents a mile range, for gas. So, if you're going to buy an EV, I would definitely suggest investing in, make the one-time investment in getting a level 2 charger at home. That's a 240 volt charger. And, and have, so you can plug that in when you come home, just plug it in, when you leave, you're on your way. And the Leaf, in at least in moderate temperatures like we had that week. I mean, even the week I had it also got pretty hot, and I was using the air conditioning and the range. 140, 150 miles of range is pretty easy to manage in that thing. So for most people, it's going to be fine. It's not quite as long a range as a Chevy Bolt. But it's also quite a bit. You can get one for quite a bit cheaper. They start at just under $30,000 before incentives. So it's a really good value option for you if you're looking for a longer range EV that is decent to drive. The only real complaint I have about the car itself is the infotainment screen, not the infotainment system. It supports both CarPlay and Android Auto, and that worked fine most of the time. But the screen itself is not a great display. It's kind of dim, and the contrast is not great. And then the performance of the system itself, it's not as responsive as a lot of the other systems I've tried. When you tap on the screen, it sometimes it responds and sometimes it doesn't. Or if it does respond, sometimes there's a little bit of a lag before something happens. So the performance of the system, the hardware, is more of the problem than anything else. But other than that, the rest of the car was great to drive as a compact commuter. It's roomy enough for 4 adults without any problem. You get decent cargo space in the back, so it's a good choice.
Yeah, and Nissan has quite a long history now of selling and building EVs. The Leaf was kind of early on the scene. I remember driving a Leaf back in 2011, something like that.
Yeah, they launched. They went on sale in the U.S. in December of 2010, like within a week or so of the first generation Chevy Bolt. They both hit dealers about the same time, in at the end of 2010.
Yeah, and the thing that impressed me was when they introduced this new Leaf. They also they ran us through all the different sort of like partnerships and deals, like the one you were talking about with EVgo and stuff. They also do a lot of partnerships with municipal fleets and stuff. They're really trying, and they're almost being quiet about it, but just sort of trying to get adoption of electric vehicles up. And honestly, I think they've done a lot for it. Nissan really deserves a bit of credit for how they've tried to encourage and promote EV technology and adoption. That maybe they're not as splashy as some of even as the Bolt. So they go by a little quietly, but the Leaf has been a worthwhile car on the market because of what it's done. It's affordable and it works. And it has that support of a major automaker with stores in lots of locales. So I really like the Leaf and the whole like story behind it, I guess. So it's about what all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's a very practical car. It's not something that's going to excite you. It's not a sports car. It's not a Z. But it'll get you where you need to go reliably. As long as it's within 140, 150 miles of where you're starting from. And it does the job. And one other feature it's got is the e-pedal mode, which similar to what GM does on the Bolt with when you put the transmission or you put the shifter in low, when you toggle the e-pedal switch, it gives you very strong regenerative braking, so you can do one pedal driving. And it works slightly differently than the system on the Bolt. On the Bolt, when you come down to a stop, on any electrified vehicle, whether it's a hybrid or a battery electric, as you come to a stop, the regenerative braking is inherently going to phase out, because what it's doing is it's recapturing kinetic energy as you're slowing down, converting that back into electrical energy through the motor generator. And on the Bolt, what they do is typically on a hybrid, and on previous EVs, what they do is as you get down to below about 5 miles an hour, it starts to phase out the regenerative braking and phase in the friction braking using your traditional brakes. And sometimes that transition can be, depending on how it's done, can be you can feel that, especially under certain types of
abrupt.
Yeah, or you may feel a little step, a change in the braking behavior as you get down to low speed. What GM did on the Bolt is if you're not touching the brake pedal, if you take your foot off the accelerator, as you get down to 2-3 miles an hour, it actually transitions from recapturing the brake energy to actually feeding some reverse torque back into the engine. So feeding some juice back in, or not the engine, the motor, feeding some electricity back into the motor to give you a reverse torque to bring you down to that final stop. And it does it in a completely seamless way. And then it just gives a little trickle of juice, just enough to hold the car in place, even if you're on a grade. In Nissan's case, they actually do use the friction braking to do that. And so it'll use the stability control actuator to apply the brakes. But I found it to be completely seamless. I never noticed any transition between the two. So they did a really good job on that. And it works really well. So, I think it's for someone that's looking for an EV and maybe doesn't want to spend quite as much up front, as what a Bolt will cost, or, other options. The Leaf is probably the best bet right now for a car that has a real usable amount of range, even in cold weather, and should be fairly reliable. Like I said, starting at 30,000, and then if you've got the federal tax incentive, you're down to 22.5, and if you're in California, you can get it under 20,000 with the state incentives. So it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, and I mean Nissan. I like the Leaf. I think it's a good car, and they continue to improve it. And they've probably done more for EVs than just most automakers until recently. So
yeah, and there is another version of it coming later this year with a larger battery. So this one has a 40 kilowatt hour battery. There'll be a 60 kilowatt version coming, 60 kilowatt hour version coming with over 200 miles of range. So it'll match the Bolt.
What I think
that'll be more expensive though.
Yeah, what I think they should do is, now that they've proven the technology out too, is they're never going to stop building the Z, from what it seems like. So they should just put the Leaf powertrain in the Z. A little more performance, a little reduced range.
Yeah, a higher power motor, at the rear axle instead of the front. And then pack some batteries where the VQ V6 goes today.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Why not?
Yeah, I mean, we may be likely to see like a hybrid an EV Q60, but
we'll probably see for the next generation Z, if and when it shows up, we'll probably use something like the e-Power system that they have on the Note, available on the Note in Japan, the Versa Note, which is a series hybrid system, and it'll probably be something more like that on the Z. I think they're also going to use that on an upcoming Infinity model as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're now I'm thinking about the Z, and I love that car, how raw it is because it's so old now. But anyway, you were driving something else too. You had the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV, which
right. So I dropped off the Leaf at the airport before I went to Minneapolis to drive the Insight, the Honda Insight, and then to California for a few days. And when I came back, I got the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid. And it's pretty much everything that I've come to expect of the Mitsubishi Outlander.
So not a whole lot.
Plug. Yeah.
I have to say, the last time I was in the Outlander, it's easy to throw stones at that car. and just be like, yeah, it's not great. But then, for the price wise, it's not terrible. It just doesn't command respect, I suppose. It's priced well, and it does all of the things. It has all of the features for the most part that its competitors do. It's just they're making the best of their platform situation.
Yeah, I mean, Mitsubishi, right now, the last year, Renault Nissan took over a controlling interest in Mitsubishi. And so they're working on a next generation of vehicles for the Mitsubishi lineup, that are going to share platforms and architectures and hardware with the rest of the Renault and Nissan lineups. So those are coming. The Outlander is kind of, the last of the older generation of Mitsubishis. And, it's not a terrible vehicle. It's not, there's nothing that's really going to excite you about it. It's okay. It's not terribly ugly. The proportions are a little odd. The nose is a little long when you look at it in profile, but aside from that, it doesn't look bad, especially, after they refreshed it a couple of years ago. And the hybrid powertrain works really well, works really smoothly. When you've got juice in the battery, you can drive at highway speeds, 70, 75 miles an hour on electricity alone. It's got about 20 miles of electric driving range, which is fine. And right now there's not really any other plug-in hybrid SUV or crossover in this price range. Right. And if you want a plug-in hybrid crossover, right at the moment at least, you still have to go up to like the German premium brands or Volvos to get something like this, and they're going to be a lot more expensive.
Right.
So the the Outlander starts at about 35, and the one I drove is about 41. It's got it's got an updated audio system that's got CarPlay and Android Auto support, so that's good.
Is it still the Rockford Fosgate?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's still a Rockford Fosgate system. It's not exceptional sound, but it's fine. It's for the average consumer. You're probably gonna, if you try it out, you're probably not gonna have any major complaints about it.
Yeah. Well, and with CarPlay or Android Auto too, the biggest issue with those for me has always been the interface, and so by using CarPlay, you kind of get around that.
Right. And the one I drove, unfortunately, somewhere along the line, somewhere in the last few loans, it came back without the charging cord, so I didn't have an opportunity to plug it in. But something that Mitsubishi does do on this one is they've got a couple of buttons for, saving your charge. So, if you're driving somewhere on the highway and you want to preserve the battery charge for when you get back into the city, so you can drive around emissions free around town. You can press the save button. There's also another one that you can enable charging, so it'll keep the engine on and run it a little bit harder to charge the battery. So if the battery was depleted, you can add some charge back into the battery. So again, around town, you can drive it electrically. So those are a couple of nice little features. It's fairly roomy. The third row seat is small, as you would expect in a mid-sized crossover of this type. But aside from that, it's fine. It's just it's not exciting, but it's not. It's not as bad as some of the Mitsubishis I've driven in past years. Right.
It's like the epitome of the sort of that'll do. I feel bad, talking smack about them because they like you said, they have a unique offering, which is that's more than some brands do these days. I mean, it's the only plug-in in that price range. So.
It's unique for the moment. Right.
No, I mean, this is only a stopgap at this point. I think they've clearly, Mitsubishi clearly understands that its platform is old. Like that wheelbase is too short. That is as big as they can get on that set of hardware, and it's just. It is what it is for the moment, and it'll sell some and get them over the hump. And then,
I mean, it's definitely not a sporty utility, like some that we've driven of late, but it's comfortable. It's got a nice, comfortable ride.
Yeah, they always drive.
It's got more than adequate acceleration. So
yeah, and Mitsubishi, their stuff always drives pretty well from just like a general driving perspective. They handle decently, and the controls don't do weird stuff. They're not overly mushy. So as much as I make jokes, it's a fine effort. So what's their hybrid system though? Is it it's developed in house, and it's like a traditional hybrid with a CVT, or is it?
Yeah, it's an in-house, power split hybrid, similar kind of architecture to a Toyota or a Ford. Nothing revolutionary. It's I think it's two motors. Two motors in there.
So like a one between the engine and the transmission, and then one in the rear.
Let's see. Yeah, actually, it looks like it's a 3-motor. Two motor. Yeah, so one between the engine and transmission, and then one for the rear axle. So it's a rear electric drive.
So that's how it does 4-wheel drive.
So yeah, for the on-demand 4-wheel drive.
Yeah.
The battery is a 12 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery that'll get you about 22 miles of electric driving. It's got support for CHAdeMO DC fast charging, same as the Leaf. So you can pop into a station that supports that and top it off pretty quickly. So it's fine
for 41 grand.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that was for a loaded one.
Yeah,
the one I had a couple little issues under hard braking. I could feel the driver's seat kind of rock just a little bit. Not a lot, just enough that something's not quite right there. And then when you lock the doors, the driver's side power mirror would fold in nicely, tucked in against the bodywork. But the one on the passenger side would go a little bit and then stop.
I mean, it's not like it had Falcon doors that wouldn't close.
That's true. Yeah, I mean those are far less of an issue than and I've driven cars over the years that had a lot more seatbelt or driver's seat rock than this one did. So the doors close reliably, they lock and unlock. So no major issues there.
Yeah, I'm still I really want to see what Mitsubishi's cooking up next, because they've got the Eclipse Cross now, that's actually pretty interesting. I just haven't had a chance to drive one, so I think that's like a new day.
I think with the collaboration with the rest of the Renault and Nissan teams, I think we're probably going to see some interesting stuff from Mitsubishi over the next 5 years.
Good. What
about you?
They need it. I drove a couple of really expensive trucks. I had the 2019 Ram 1500 in Laramie trim. I can't figure out whether it was Laramie Longhorn or just Laramie with some extra options, but either way, it was a big, huge inside, relatively comfortable, quiet, luxurious pickup truck.
The crew cab or the?
Oh yeah, no, it had all the full 4 doors. It wasn't the shorter 4. It was because they have right. They still
that thing's got a huge amount of legroom in the back seat.
Oh, it's enormous, and so there's still the rumors that this truck is going to sort of spawn a top of the range Jeep SUV, and I can totally understand that because I really was like, I would like this vehicle a lot if it were a traditional full-size SUV, which instead of having a bed, if it had a third row. And I think it would make a very good vehicle like that. Like it would be a really good 3-row SUV.
That would be a really serious challenger to GM and Ford in that case. As a Jeep, especially with the Jeep styling and the Jeep name on there
and the Jeep profit margin.
Yes, I think they could get some serious margins on a vehicle like that. You could probably have a top end Jeep based on that platform, that you could sell for $100,000.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially where the prices of stuff like the Escalade and the Navigator are going, and we'll get back to that. But the Laramie trim it's lovely. I mean, Chrysler certainly does interiors really well, even in trucks, and styling is a high point for them. This is a great looking truck. It's really well turned out inside, and I know that the Laramie trim is like it'd be interesting for me to look at the Tradesman, and see like what the differences are, because this is the luxury version. But even the stuff like the plastic trim around the bezels, they thought about it. It's not just like, you know, a normal piece of plastic like with just a rolled over radius and vacuum deposited chrome. They set it up so that it looks like it came out of a casting. So it's got like a rough edge and then had the face machined. So it's just like, it's a much more complex mold to make that. And then it was like some satin metal coating on it. So like all of those little details add up to make a really nice environment that, while it's a pickup truck, fully sort of embrace the fact that, yeah, these are vehicles that people buy because they don't buy, you know, a Cadillac or a 300 or, you know, a BMW. They buy the truck because they want the truck.
Did yours have the big touchscreen in the middle?
I think so.
Or the 8.5-inch screen?
I think I want to say it had the 8.5-inch screen.
Okay, because there's also the one that has the 12-inch screen, which basically extends to the top half of the screen. You still have this basically the same UI as what you get with the standard Uconnect, and then more of the controls embedded in the touchscreen, the bottom half of the touchscreen as well. Yeah,
I think that's standard in the 8.4 inch is standard in the
Laramie.
Yeah. Yeah. But it did have the LED headlights, and it didn't have running boards, which it really desperately needed because it's kind of tall and I'm kind of short. You know, it was a lovely, you know, beautifully designed truck that's, you know, certainly down to do some work. It has all the truck features, you know, like that you need. I didn't have a chance to really challenge it, but you know, trucks are this place where everybody's putting their best into trucks. So it's really well turned out. And I don't think you can go wrong with any of the brands. This one being the newest is one of my favorites. You know, I think that between the big three, I'm probably less of a F-Series fan. And I think the GM trucks are right in the middle. And this one, because it's so new, I think they corrected a lot of stuff on it. And it has the coil spring suspension, and just it drives like a Chrysler, and they always drive well to my taste. So
yeah, you know, I drove the Ram in March out in Arizona, and you know, with that coil spring rear suspension, which is unique in the full size truck segment, at least for now, it's a really impressive you know, truck, you know, in terms of its ride quality and its driving dynamics. You know, it doesn't feel like you're driving a 3-ton truck most of the time.
Yeah, I mean that's a neat trick. And you know, the only area I guess that it does feel like it's kind of a big heavy vehicle is that 5.7 liter Hemi, even with almost 400 horsepower, feels a little bit like, I mean, it moves it along, but not quite with the authority that you might expect from, you know, something that has a Hemi badge on it, you know?
Right. No, you know, what I'm still waiting for is a chance to try out the 48 volt mild hybrid version.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, that's going to be standard on the V6 and then optional on the Hemis. And, you know, that on the Hemis, you know, that's going to add another 130 foot-pounds of torque from the belted starter generator system on there. And that will be interesting to see how that behaves and how much real world fuel economy benefit you can get out of it.
Yeah, well, I was surprised with the fuel economy out of this one, not because it was so great, but because it wasn't so terrible. And it has, you know, the I think it had an on-off automatic, you know, where it would shut down.
Yeah, it's got auto stop start.
Yeah. And so that stuff, it works. I mean, my fuel economy was like 16 and a half, 16, almost 17 average over the time it was with me, which, yeah, it's not great, but it's not
I mean, if you're driving mostly around town, you know, in a truck like that, that's not terrible. You're not going to get a whole lot better than that from, you know, the competing trucks just yet anyway.
Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, so at the end of this year, you know, around November or so, GM is supposed to start production of their new trucks. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how those compare to this one.
Yeah, and I'm waiting for the first full-size truck to sort of fully embrace the fuel economy thing, where they downsize the engine to a smaller four cylinder.
Well, that's what GM's doing.
Yeah, I know, but also like put a hybrid, like put the two together.
I'm sure that's sooner rather than later, at least from GM. I think Ford's going to launch their hybrid in 2020 on the F-150. But from what I'm hearing, I think that's probably going to be with a V6, not with a four-cylinder.
It'll probably be with the Nano, which the Nano versus a four-cylinder, the V6 might do better there anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, GM's going to have a 2.7 liter four-cylinder turbo in the new Silverado and Sierra. So
yeah, and I think that's that. Well, the GMs are some of the lightest trucks. I think Fords they make a big deal about the Fords being aluminum, but I think the GM trucks out of steel are within like not 50 to 100 pounds. They're not.
Well, now the current generation GM trucks are about 150.
Oh, is it more?
200 pounds more. I think what it was, the previous generation of the Ford trucks were particularly heavy. And when they went to aluminum, they chopped a lot of weight on there, and it made them lighter than the other trucks. But GM's already done, for their new truck, they're using some aluminum, but they're also using a lot of high strength steel. And that's going to, they should be probably roughly about even on the new trucks.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in Truckland that, it's worth keeping an eye on, because I think that they're repeating a lot of stuff that happened with cars over the last 20 years. It's starting to pick away at with trucks. And I think it's really started to accelerate, regardless of what goes on with actual fuel economy regulations and stuff. I think that the automakers are just going to continue. I would be surprised if they stop, because, some regulation gets, eased at a certain point. They're like, well, we're committed. We're going to have to at least follow this through. And who knows what happens between here and there.
They've already, laid out a product plan, and, you can't necessarily, just because something is a certain way under the current administration doesn't mean it's going to stay that way.
Right.
So you're better off to stick with the plan, especially, if it's a plan that you can make money on. And continue down that path, so that when somebody decides again that you need to start cranking fuel economy up, you'll be ready for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, even before that too, the fuel efficient trucks are going to do better when the price of gas goes up, and it's already crept up a little bit. So
yeah, it's around $3 a gallon around here now. So
yeah, so regardless of who says you must do what, if the trucks are there with what the consumers need, they'll do all right. But we talked about the Ford trucks, and the other thing I had a chance to drive before I hopped on a plane was a 2018 Lincoln Navigator Black Label. And so that's about a $94,000 Lincoln, which seems weird to think about. But then you consider what it's competing with, and it's really competitive, actually. I just couldn't get comfortable in it, which I was sad about, because it's old style Lincoln glamour in the way they've got it blitzed up, and I don't say that as a sort of crack at it either. It's very well done. The design inside and out is really nice. They did a really good job giving it a unique identity. The interior is beautiful. It's just the seats which let me down. I couldn't.
I mean, with those 36 way adjustments, you still couldn't find a comfortable position.
Right. There's that one key adjustment that they couldn't accommodate, is to get the head restraint from pushing my head down. It's like, and it has the motorized in and out setting. And a lot of times, I've talked about where I'll take the head restraints out and turn them around, and that usually makes it a little better. You can't do that with these, because there were screens on the back and they're motorized. So you couldn't, and BMW has that too, but you could they have an adjustment where you can flex the top of the seat back a little bit and get comfortable. So I couldn't get that. That requires then you have to play with the backrest angle to sort of get some sort of normalcy. And I couldn't get comfortable in the seats, which made me a little sad, because otherwise, the cabin of this thing is really beautifully turned out. It's nicely designed. The ergonomics are a little strange. Like where you'd think there's a start button, it's actually the trailer backing control kind of thing. And it's so
right. The pro trailer control, I think they call it.
Yeah, I kept hitting that to shut it off because the start button is actually up on it's just on the upper edge of the dash, and it's still Sync 3, so it's kind of, you got to deal with some of that. It's a lot better than it was. So I think with some time to operate it, you'd be okay. But yeah, touch screens in cars are going to get my continual sort of hatred. So. But it's a big, quiet, comfy-ish place. It had a lot of motorized features, which are nice, like the motorized third row, and then the power second row, and the motorized hatch, and it had the automatic.
Everything is
boards.
Motorized in this thing.
Yeah, and so that's why I say it's like old Detroit luxury, right? Because it's almost like that. It's not window dressing, but it's like, well, how can we just slather more on?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think it's kind of a mix of, that classic American luxury, but also, modern German, with every feature and amenity you can think of, with everything power operated, all the electronics and everything, there's a lot there. And so it's this kind of odd mix. I personally, I think they did a good job of blending it, because it's really not trying to directly compete with the European premium brands. They've realized that that's a dead end. They're to try to directly take on Mercedes and BMW and Audi, would be so horrendously expensive, and it would take so long that, they decided that the better approach was to really focus on the customer experience, really execute the vehicle well within the constraints of what they could do, and then really focus on the whole customer experience angle.
Yeah, well, and I think that's really important. That's probably smart, because the Navigator is larger than Mercedes, Audi, BMW offerings, so it has that advantage. It's got its traditional truck in terms of having a frame under it, which that gives it another advantage. It's designed, I think, for American use, if you will. And
was yours the XL or the standard version?
Mine was the standard version, but it's still big enough.
Yeah. Now imagine that with an extra foot in there.
Yeah. And I think that's its biggest selling point is like, yeah, it's a truck, but it's really nice and quiet. I mean, the carpeting was like, cut pile carpet like you'd have in a house and stuff. And it's really nice and comfortable, but it's also underneath it all, it's a pretty decent truck. So, it had the 3.5 liter, they don't call it the EcoBoost like we've
TDI.
Noted. Yeah. That engine's really powerful and responsive. And it's efficient too. This also got about 17 miles to the gallon, which, for what it is not terrible. And I don't think it would actually suffer too much if it were doing the kind of towing that a Lincoln owner would use it for,
Which color combination did you have?
That it was bad. It was light metallic blue everywhere. Okay. The interior was light blue. It was just like my Crown Vic. It was light metallic blue on the outside and just light blue on the inside.
I think they call that one the Yacht Club theme.
Yeah,
so there's like the 3 different Black Label themes, and it'd have the bleached teak trim. Yeah.
Which, like, if they had natural teak, it would have looked so much better. Like, you just like this is all down to taste and design, but the design is lovely. I really love the design of the instrument panel for, to sort of geek out on details. I'm not super fond of the way they've integrated the screen. They've done the best they could, but that would be a lovely sweep of a panel without a screen on it. And, just overall beautifully designed, not real good looking in blue with white stitching, but if that's your thing, the materials are good.
That's the same combination. I think that particular combination, that's their, I forget the word they use for it. It's their star combination, that they use, at auto shows and everything else. That's the one that they like to highlight. Because they seem to like that one the best.
Well, it probably looks really good in a show situation, like inside under lights. I can see that looking better than, or at least more striking. Yeah, I mean, I like seeing Lincoln get something of its own, and the Navigator certainly stands apart from the Expedition.
Yeah, and the thing we talked about a bit, when I drove it a couple of months ago, is when you sit in this thing, if you sit in the Navigator and then you go sit in an Expedition, they're obviously the same type of vehicle, a big SUV, but you look at it inside, and there is nothing. If you didn't know that it was all the same hardware underneath the visible parts, there none of the parts that you see and touch are common with the Expedition. Every single piece in that IP, all the switchgear, the steering wheel, everything is unique to Lincoln. So even though it's on the same platform, it uses the same powertrain. Uses all the really the expensive parts. Those are the ones that are common, but those are the ones you don't see. But the ones that you touch and feel every day, that is distinct, and so you don't feel like when you're in this, you don't feel like you're driving a Ford. Well, then, other than the Sync UI.
Yeah, but that's no small effort either to make it different.
Absolutely. I mean, and in fact, I guess I kind of misspoke a little bit when I said the more expensive parts, because in fact, it actually does take a lot of cost a lot and takes a lot of effort to engineer all this switchgear and validate it all and manufacture it. And this is one of the things that we've talked about with Tesla before. I think one of the reasons I think there's two kind of driving forces behind the way Tesla does their very minimalist interiors. One is they're trying to make it look more futuristic and more high tech. That's a part of it. But the other thing is it also saves them a lot of money.
Yeah, there's no actual hardware to build.
Yeah. When you don't have to engineer all these switches and assemble everything, and it's all just done in software in the screen, it saves you a lot of cost. Of course, it's often less reliable.
Well, yeah, and that's the same kind of thing. If you look back too, you'd see the supercars doing. Even Ferraris used Fiat switches and stuff, and The Viper had a bunch of Grand Cherokee stuff in it, so that makes sense to save money on that stuff where you can. But I think it also makes sense here to really give the thing its own identity. The thing that got the most comments, I think, from people riding in it was the push button shift.
Yeah,
because that's really different, and it takes a minute to figure it out. I don't really feel one way or another about it. It's a solution to clear out space in the console, so it achieves that goal. It does kind of put you in the situation now where you've got like a non-standard thing you have to remember how to use.
But on the other hand, if you're not like us driving a different vehicle every week, if you're driving this thing day after day for a couple of years, you will get used to that fairly quickly.
Yeah, and
so we complain about that. About the non-standard, interface for stuff like that. And there are, a lot of times there are very legitimate complaints.
Yeah.
There are some really bad ones, like, the Lincoln MKC, for example, the way they did the push button shifter on that along the side of the instrument cluster.
Oh yeah.
Hidden behind the steering wheel. So you've got to lean over to the right to look around the steering wheel to figure out which one to press. Whereas here, at least it's out in the open. It's, below the center, in a row across below the center vents. And so it's at least visible on this one. But, I think for the average buyer that is going to live with one of these vehicles for one or more years, I think that's probably less of an issue as long as it's not too ergonomically poorly executed.
Yeah, and there's some things that I would like to see them do. You could add some raised areas on those switches, almost like if you think about like how Braille works, so that they're tactily different, so you can even shift by feel.
Yeah.
I'm sure that came up too. So there's refinements you could make to that stuff that would maybe even make it better. But it's a luxury SUV, and it had a lot of that stuff. A lot of the driver support stuff was good. The adaptive cruise, it had a head-up display, which I like that stuff. I think those should be standard. Lane departure warning, which is helpful in something so big. The camera system also helpful in something so big to just maneuver it. And actual 4x4 system with hill descent control, and you'll get stuck off road with it with this giant turbine style wheels, but it can do it if you equip it correctly. So yeah, I mean, this is the best Navigator they've ever made, and there's a lot of potential and promise here.
Arguably the best Lincoln ever made.
I don't know, man. The Mark II.
Okay.
That Mark II.
Certainly, the best modern Lincoln.
Okay.
I mean, even in that third row seat, even in the standard wheelbase model, adults can fit in that third row seat fairly comfortably, unlike in an Escalade or a Suburban, because of the fact that Ford uses an independent rear suspension, so you have a much lower floor in the Expedition and Navigator that lets you sit, in a more comfortable seating position, in a more normal seating position, instead of, with the floor being, with the third row seats in the GM utilities sit right on the floor, and so you sit in a very knees up position, and it's not very comfortable. And this one, that's not an issue at all. Yeah,
and so those functional improvements are what's going to make it, I think, what's going to make owners really rave about their vehicles, right? Like that, and the dealership experience, which hopefully they actually follow through on. That's how you win customers. You don't necessarily have to do a full-on product assault, and I think they've learned that. They've watched Cadillac do it the product way, and I think Lincoln's trying to mix the two. It's like, yeah, we'll improve the product, but we also need to make the experience better and make the product fit people's lives versus just try to make our own versions of the Halo vehicles that other people make. So,
yep.
It's a good thing. The Revel audio system, by the way, sounds bad. That's all I'll say about it. But I could not make it sound good. It was weird.
Okay.
So yeah. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about other stuff. Let's see. So the things we wanted to chat about. We can figure out what order we pick them in. But Ford bought Michigan Central Station. You drove the 2019 Insight, and looks like Volvo is opening a new factory in the U.S. to make the S60. And then you spoke with what's the Dan Ammon and Mark Royce thing?
Yeah, so Dan Ammon and Mark Royce, two of the top executives at General Motors today. Dan Ammon is the president, and Mark Royce is executive VP. So Ammon is second in command to CEO Mary Barra, and then Royce is right behind him. So Royce, for the last several years, has been responsible for all the product development at GM. And Ammon actually came to GM in 2010 after the bankruptcy as the treasurer, and eventually became CFO. And he led them through their IPO. So he handled most of the IPO process after the bankruptcy. And so kind of, over the last, 6 or 7 years, or probably, I guess, about the last 5 years since Mary Barra stepped up to CEO, Ammon has kind of handled the global product portfolio and some of the larger, business planning side of it. And Royce has had responsibility for all the product itself. And so what they're doing, there was a report earlier this week, or a couple days ago, that they are shifting responsibilities a little bit. And one of the things, it's been interesting with Dan Ammon over the last year, whenever there's been anything going on with cruise automation or, the autonomous stuff, he's been very much front and center with that, as like the top GM executive at those events. And then, Royce has been, on all the other product stuff. And so I guess what's happening now is Ammon is giving up some of his responsibilities related to the Cadillac brand. And he's going to be focusing more on the whole business side of automated vehicles and what's going on with Cruise. And there's some speculation that, with the recent investment by SoftBank into GM Cruise LLC, which was the wholly owned subsidiary of GM that's doing their automated driving development. that at some point, that could be spun off, or it could be set up as a separate tracking stock from the standard GM stock, and that eventually Eamon could end up being the CEO of GM Cruise, but for now, at least, he's going to take on more responsibility for what's going on with the business around automated mobility services and their automated driving systems. And Royce is picking up responsibility for Cadillac engineering, more of the Cadillac product line. We still have Steve Carlisle as the president of Cadillac, but that's more. His role is more on the marketing and sales side of the business, and Royce will continue to be. Royce will also get the global product portfolio planning.
Okay, I mean, he's a good product guy. Like I like his touch is good. He's got a long sort of family history with GM and product and performance vehicles in particular too, right? Wasn't his dad pretty deep into performance? His
dad was GM president in the 1980s. He led Buick for many years. Lloyd Royce.
That's right. Was his dad?
Lloyd's still alive?
Yeah, and doesn't the GN come out under his sort of guidance?
The Grand National? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That was all him. The Buick Turbo V6s, that all came out under Lloyd Royce's leadership. And Mark Royce, over the past I guess about 10 years since he came back from Australia, right. He did a stint in Australia for I think 7 or 8 years, right. Leading Holden.
Those Commodores that we all really wanted, yes. I think was his thing.
We all said we wanted, but when they actually brought them over, nobody actually bought them. Either whether they were badged as G8s or Chevrolet SSs. Everybody wanted them, but nobody actually ponied up to pay for them. But nonetheless, they were still very good vehicles, and they also provided the basis for a number of North American GM products like the 5th generation Camaro and the previous generation CTS. Were based on that platform, but now they're they've moved on to other stuff. But yeah, I mean, under Mark Royce's leadership, over the past 7 or 8 years, I mean, GM has done some really impressive engineering work in terms of improving their vehicles, but also, doing a lot of things with weight reduction, that didn't have to resort to using exotic materials or going to aluminum intensive structures. So they've done some really smart engineering work.
Yeah,
and there's some really impressive stuff there.
Well, even when they've done exotic stuff like the Cadillac CT6 has that's quite a high tech body structure. They've done it really well and really thoughtfully.
Yeah, I mean, they developed things like they figured out a way to weld aluminum and steel together. Without causing galvanic corrosion, which is something that nobody ever figured out before. So yeah, they've done. There's a lot of good work that's been done there. So I think that these kind of shifting responsibilities at the top of GM, I think bode well for a strong future, over the next 5 to 10 years for GM, both on their traditional product side, but also for what they're doing on the autonomous side.
Yeah. So with the move to sort of focus, not focus GM on entirely, but they're obviously paying attention to autonomy and that sort of next wave of innovation. But it sounds like the traditional car is not dead there, which where all of us traditional car fans are a little worried about too.
Well, let's rephrase that. The traditional vehicle.
Traditional vehicle.
Cars may well be dead or dying. Based on what we saw. The other thing that I didn't put on the list. The other day in Atlanta, Chevrolet unveiled the 2019 Blazer.
Yeah, everybody's upset about it, and it's just like, I mean, they own the name. Like, just because you have some sort of emotional attachment to the old name, what the Blazer used to be, doesn't mean that they have to make another one just to satisfy you.
I think this is probably something we'll see more of. One of the issues, and we'll get into this a little bit in a minute with the Honda Insight as well. It's really hard, really expensive to launch a new nameplate into the marketplace. To get brand recognition for a new vehicle nameplate. And they're, every car company has done this, where they've tried to launch new models, add new models and bring them, the getting people familiar with what is a Blazer or, what is a Cruise, and then of course, GM has had its issues with that, in terms of confusion among its nameplates. Like they launched the Volt and then they brought out the Bolt, and they have the Chevrolet Cruise, and then now the autonomous version of the Bolt is called the GM Cruise, spelled differently with this S instead of a Z. But naming is always a challenge, and I think that's one of the reasons why, especially a lot of the premium brands have stuck to alphanumeric things, because then the focus is more on the brand rather than the individual model nameplate. But for GM, Blazer's a known name, well associated with SUVs. Although this is going to be a different kind of vehicle. It's it's a mid-size crossover. Based on the fact that it's being built at their Ramos plant in Mexico. It's probably a derivative of the Theta platform, their compact crossover platform, which is used for the Equinox and the Cadillac XT5 and the GMC Terrain, just a longer version of that. So we'll see. It's definitely got very aggressive styling for a crossover, and this is something we'll definitely be seeing more of in the next few years. Is crossovers that look less like trucks, less like traditional SUVs, and bring in more cues based on cars rather than an off-road vehicle.
And so the cycle continues. I'm still having trouble just trying to figure out where exactly it fits. I guess so. It's a little smaller than the Equinox, even though it's based on the Equinox.
No, it's bigger than the Equinox, smaller than Traverse.
Oh, okay.
So the Chevy crossover lineup goes from the Trax, or if you listen to Chevy, it also includes the Bolt, but it's really is the crossover. So the Trax, the Equinox, the Blazer, and then the Traverse, and then at the top, you have the body on frame Tahoe and Suburban.
But didn't the Traverse just get smaller?
No, the new Traverse is the same size. So with the Lambda platform, the big crossover platform, what they did is they diverged the three. They had the GMC Acadia, the Buick Enclave, and the Chevy Traverse. And previously they were all dimensionally identical. And so this time they wanted to split them a little bit, to cover a little more ground in the marketplace. So they made the Acadia a little bit smaller.
Oh, that's what I'm thinking of.
So it's a shorter wheelbase. Nominal, it's available with an optional third row, but it's more of a second row, and it's actually a little bigger than what the Blazer is going to be. And then the Traverse is almost exactly the same dimensions as the first generation Traverse. So same length, same height, same width. The Enclave keeps the same length and wheelbase as the first generation, but the bodywork is a little bit sleeker. It's a little lower to the ground than the Traverse. So it's targeted more at a more premium luxury audience, that's not necessarily going to be interested in towing. You're not really going to go off-roading in a Traverse either, but it's got, a little more of that truck-like feel to it.
Right. Well, the Traverse will certainly stack up a little under the Enclave price-wise too. So with all this stuff that's coming, plus the Cadillac XT4, and there will probably be a larger Cadillac crossover off the Lambda platform at some point. Basically they're trying to hit every conceivable niche. Have a crossover or utility vehicle that fits every conceivable size class. Yeah, almost like BMW has done with their lineup, where they've got like this splatter of models. But I still feel like I don't know. There's like a lot of, they're not all that separate. Like I guess they're kind of stacked right on top of each other, sort of size wise, among all of their.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a huge difference in size. I mean, you're talking 3 or 4 inches, in wheelbase or length, going from one to the next one. But what they have done, if you look at them though, they actually especially if you look at the Chevrolet lineup, just as one brand, there's actually quite a bit of diversity in the design between them. So the Blazer looks quite a bit different from the Equinox, and in turn the Traverse, and then the Trax, again, is a little bit different at the low end. So I think that they will probably appeal to different customers. The Blazer, I think this new Blazer is clearly more of an urban utility vehicle than an off-road country vehicle, if you, so to speak. So I think they'll appeal to different customers.
Such strange sort of twists of words.
Yeah, I know.
Urban utility, but I think that the value in the Blazer name is there. That's why it's been kind of amusing to sit back. Like you said, it's really expensive to launch a nameplate, and traditionally, the North American automakers are bad at that stick-to-itiveness, I guess, with a name. They don't.
Yeah, they do have a tendency to jump, from one generation to the next, swapping names out.
Right.
Like look at Ford with their compacts. They went from Pinto to Escort to Focus, and who knows what's next.
Right. So why wouldn't you just say, okay, Pinto had its own issues, so okay, Escort. Let's keep Escort and just make each generation of Escort different, like the 3 Series
or better.
Yeah. You can change the car underneath, but keep the name for the consistency's sake, so people know. After a while, it gets ingrained in their head. I hope that is a thing that they do more of. Now that they have all these names that they've paid to develop and people know what they are, right? That's why they went back to Taurus, because everybody's like, what's a Ford 500? Yeah, a Taurus. Okay.
Right. And that's exactly why, Ford, at the Detroit show in January floated the idea of their new electric crossover being called the Mach 1.
Yeah, you're gonna.
That's a name that Mustang fans, Ford fans will recognize. They won't associate it with this kind of vehicle, but it's a name that's recognizable. And
right.
It's sounding like they've moved away from using that particular name, so they may not call it the Mach 1. Who knows? But it's certainly a name that people recognize. Yeah,
and there's a value there. They shouldn't throw that away. So.
Yeah. And, as far as, having, different design, across a lineup of utility vehicles, Ford's doing the same thing. The stuff that we'll see over the next 18 months, there's quite a bit of diversity in the way these look. There's cues that tell you, each one of these is a Ford, but the Ford, the Bronco is going to look very different from an Escape, which is going to look different from the new Explorer. And so there's going to be more diversity, with all these different variations of SUV and crossover that they're going to have. They want to have different designs for each one to appeal to different customers. Yeah. I think that this Blazer thing will sort of blow over, and then when they bring out the Bronco, it's going to be the same thing all over again. It's not the square little thing from the 60s. Right. Well, and I wouldn't be surprised. My guess is that this isn't the last addition we'll see to the Chevrolet utility lineup. I'm guessing that we will probably see a more off-road oriented vehicle based on the Colorado platform, within the next year to 18 months. Do you think it'll be a Chevy though? My suspicion is that it'll be a GMC. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, it could be it could be both. That's true. But actually, it probably would make more sense to do it as a GMC. To kind of put more space between what GMC is versus what Chevrolet is and what Buick is. Well, and the reason why I say GMC too is because they just go for more cash. GMC, that's true. That. Swapping out a Chevy bow tie for a GMC badge does instantly add a couple of grand margin to the bottom line of that vehicle. And it's the same thing. I don't understand it, but whatever. It's fine. Yeah, whatever. Happy for you. Speaking of nameplate consistency too, you got to drive the new 2019 Honda Insight, which just looks like an Accord to me. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of in between an Accord and a Civic. I mean, it's for all intents and purposes, this is the new Civic hybrid. It's built on the Civic platform. it shares the roof panel and the rear fenders are the only bodywork that's actually shared with the Civic sedan. Everything else is unique sheet metal to the Insight, and it's a more upscale look. Maybe a little more restrained, a little more refined than the Civic, but it's the same chassis, the same floor pan. Actually, the floor pan is actually modified a little bit to accommodate the battery, which is mounted under the rear seat. But same architecture, comes down the same assembly line in Greenburgh, Indiana, where they build one of the plants where they build Civics now, it's really good. But as we said, Insight is a brand, a nameplate from Honda that has some familiarity. I think fans of the previous two generations of Insight, have a positive feeling to it.
Wait, did the second generation Insight have any fans?
There were a couple.
That was a bad car.
There were a couple. This is absolutely a much better car than either of the first two Insights. So the first Insight that came out in 2000, was a little 2-seat teardrop shaped coupe. Aluminum intensive, very lightweight, and
manual. Had a manual.
Yeah, beat the original Toyota Prius to the U.S. market by about 4 months, even though the Prius came out in Japan a couple years earlier. And then the second generation Insight came out in 2008, as it was a 5-door hatchback, kind of Prius shaped, based on the Fit platform, but kind of neutered all the best stuff about the Fit. Had a flinty ride, lost the packaging, the great packaging of the Fit because of its low profile bodywork.
Well, and it also felt really cheap inside.
Yeah, it did. Well, and it was built to a price, and it came out at a time, when a lot of Hondas were being built to a price. The interiors, took a dive, as they got cheaper. The whole car, they tried to lightweight it, and it was just, it did not work, and didn't sell very well for several years. It was relatively inexpensive compared to the Prius at the time, but it was more expensive than a Fit, and didn't give you a whole lot better fuel economy than a Fit, and the packaging was way worse. So this time they're using the Civic as the platform, and it's way better executed.
Well, I mean, it looks like a normal car, which I think I guess that's a double-edged sword, right? Like, as the Prius does the Prius thing, where it has a definable sort of style. This just looks like a normal sedan, but it looks great too. So, that's helpful. Weird.
It looks like a normal sedan, and the look of the current generation Civic is not necessarily appealing to everyone. It's to some people, consider it a little overstyled, especially in the hatchback form. But it's an excellent car to drive. This one retains all of the good stuff about the Civic, gives it a little more upscale look, both outside and also inside in particular. And this is one of the things that, Honda says they were aiming for with this car, is to make it feel more premium than both the Civic and past Insights. So there's actually not a whole lot in terms of the hardware inside the car that is shared with the Civic, at least the visible stuff. It has a newer infotainment system, based on what you get in the Accord and the CR-V and the Odyssey. So it's got rotary volume and tuning knobs, just like those cars, instead of the touch volume controls that the Civic has. Different steering wheel, and my guess is that at some, when they get around to doing the mid-cycle refresh on the Civic, sometime in the next 12 months, we'll probably see a lot of this stuff come into the Civic as well. But one of the interesting points is, in the Civic, underneath the center console, there's actually a little cubby underneath the center console. So you like a lot of modern cars, you've got this kind of floating center console, and then there's a little storage cubby underneath there that you can access from either side. That's missing in the Insight, because one of the things they did was, in order to maintain the common front structure with the Civic, they because of the extra hybrid hardware that they have under there, they moved the 12-volt battery inside, and so it's actually mounted underneath that center console.
Yeah, that's becoming more and more common, I guess, is inside mounted batteries. My Jeep has
usually they go in the trunk though.
And the Volvos, my last Volvos had them in the trunk. So so it's a smaller battery though, I'm assuming, to fit like in that space.
Not a whole lot smaller. I mean, it's a decent sized console. It is an AGM battery, so it's an absorbed glass mat, deep cycle battery, like the ones they use on cars with auto stop start systems. The powertrain on this is their third generation 2-motor hybrid system, so it's similar to what's in the new Accord hybrid, but with a 1.5 liter Atkinson cycle 4-cylinder that's in the Clarity plug-in hybrid. And then, as I said, the high voltage battery sits underneath the rear seat, and so there's no compromise to the trunk, the cargo volume in the trunk, and you still get the fold down rear seats, and you get the full size pass through, unlike some other hybrids where you get a little slot that you can stuff things through. This one you get the full size pass through from the trunk for long objects. It drives really well. It's fuel efficient. The ones we drove were the touring models, which is it comes in LX, EX, or touring, and the touring gets slightly lower fuel economy. The LX and EX are rated at 55 combined, or 52 combined, I think, 55 in the city, and the touring is at 48 because it's got bigger wheels, tires, 17-inch wheels and tires. It drives pretty much like a Civic, handles, similar driving dynamics to the Civic, which you would expect. The only, when the engine's off, or when you're just, going steady state, the powertrain is really, really quiet. Hard acceleration, you can hear, a bit of the motor boating, that you can hear the engine working a bit, but it's not too terribly offensive. Driving, fairly briskly on our drive. I didn't make any attempt to maximize fuel economy, and we got 41 miles per gallon. So I think and more normal driving, getting mid to upper 40s would be pretty easy in this thing. So it's if you're looking for a really fuel efficient, roomy compact sedan, that has lots of features, I think this is definitely one worth considering.
What does it go for, though? Like, it sounds like it's going upscale. So is the price also going upscale?
The EX starts at 22. The LX starts at 22. The EX goes for 24 and a half or so. And the Touring is about 28. Typical Honda fashion, there's not a lot of standalone options. Basically, everything is packaged into those trim levels. I think all in, with everything available on a Touring, you're still looking, like 29 and change roughly. Now the way they package some of the options is a little bit different from the Civic with the nominally the same trim levels. So the Honda Sensing package, the driver assist package, is standard across all Insights, which is something they're moving towards across all Hondas going forward. So you get adaptive cruise control and lane keeping and all that stuff as standard equipment. But for example, the EX, the Insight EX does not have a sunroof. So if you want a sunroof, you have to go to the Touring, whereas the Civic EX does have a sunroof. So the comparisons are not exact. So basically, you're looking at about a $2,000 premium over a comparably equipped Civic, but it's still pretty reasonable. And for a car that is not a huge car on the outside, it's very roomy on the inside. A couple of adults in the back seat, even three on shorter trips. It's not the widest car in the world, but in terms of legroom and headroom, there's plenty of that. And the trunk is like 15 cubic feet, which is pretty good. Yeah, so it's a good sized trunk. And it's well shaped, very usable. And personally, I would have preferred to see them, maybe do a hatchback version of the Insight. But that's me. But so how does it stack up against like the Hyundai Ioniq or the Prius? It definitely feels more upscale than either of those. It doesn't have any of the weirdness of the Prius. So I would absolutely take this over a Prius, even though, Prius, you're going to get, a little bit more, both the Insight or the Ioniq and the Prius, you're going to get probably a little more peak fuel economy. But I think in most normal driving, the difference is going to be small enough that, as you get above, get to 35, 40 miles per gallon and above, the differences in how much fuel you actually save for every additional mile per gallon really start to dwindle. And so, your fuel costs are not actually going to be much different in this thing versus those two. And, it feels more premium than either of those two and doesn't have any of the Prius weirdness, and certainly looks a lot better on the outside than the Prius. I like the Ioniq, the looks, but, I think this one is definitely more upscale.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, it's good to have another sort of choice in that lower priced, high fuel economy kind of option. Like when you start to look around, there's not a whole lot of choices when you want to try to keep the cost below, say, 30 or 35, and you want good fuel economy, whether it's a diesel, a hybrid, or an EV or whatever.
Yeah, and this is a lot more enjoyable to drive, at least than the Prius. I like the Civic driving dynamics. The Insight driving dynamics a lot better. Even though the Insight is much improved, I would take this one, or rather, the current Prius is much improved over previous generations. I would still prefer this one.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a thoroughly American car too, where all the pieces and parts come from. So.
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
It's assembled in Indiana. Engines, the hybrid transmission now they're building those in Ohio as well. So their Ohio transmission plant is now building the hybrid transmissions for both the Accord and the Insight here in the U.S. And battery packs are assembled in Kentucky, although I think the cells still come from Japan. So it's got a lot of U.S. content in it. So
there you go. Speaking of that U.S. content, I was trying to pivot us to the S60, because there's a new S60 being built in the U.S. and that's Volvo's first U.S. plant.
Yep. Not their first North American plant, but their first U.S. plant.
Right. Their last North American plant was Halifax?
Yeah, I think it was in Halifax. It was somewhere in Nova Scotia back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, they were doing knockdown kits there.
Yeah, exactly. So they would ship over boxes of parts and just screw them together in Halifax and then deliver them across North America. With the 240 series. Yeah,
which I was really excited to find out that they were doing that. I really wanted my 240 to be a Halifax car. It was a Torslanda car. So
yeah,
well. So yeah, that's what's more exciting though. Is just like the new S60 or the fact that Volvo now has a US plant?
I think both. The S60. I'm actually more excited for the V60 than the S60 myself.
Yeah, I can understand that.
The S60 is a great looking car, and the V60 makes it even better because it's a wagon. Otherwise, the same thing. The S60 is available with 3 powertrain options: the T5 2-liter turbo, the T6. You add a supercharger to that, and the T8 plug-in hybrid. Because this is built on the SPA, the scalable platform architecture, there'll be, when the next generation XC90 comes out, and I think they said about a year or so from now, which seems kind of early, but whatever. Maybe it's a refresh. They're going to add production of that to this plant in South Carolina as well. And then we may well see, production of XC60s here. They could build all of those, all those different variations because they all come off the same platform in South Carolina. One of the things that was interesting, Håkan Samuelsson at the event, he's the CEO of Volvo Cars, said that based on how the current trade situation works out in terms of tariffs and so on.
Right, that's my concern.
That's actually going to impact what their decisions are for building vehicles here in the U.S. and actually seem to indicate that with tariffs on aluminum and steel that they may actually scale back some of their plans, for expansion in South Carolina, because of the extra cost associated with that. So rather than bringing more production to the U.S., it could actually lead to less production and fewer sales in North America.
Yeah,
or at least in the U.S.
And I think that's not an uncommon situation especially when you look at the Southeast, which has become, I don't want to say thick with automakers, but there's a lot more there than you might think.
Thick with automakers. There's a lot of, most of the new car plants built in the last 15, 20 years, especially those built by foreign automakers, have been built in the Southeast, in large part because that region is pretty hostile to the UAW and to unions in general. And, the manufacturers would just as soon build a plant without a union.
Yeah, well, and they have port access, and there's a lot of pluses on the plus side of the ledger as well. Besides the anti-union stance or sentiment, it seems like every time the Southeast sort of starts to get going, they get kicked. The whole tariff thing just really frustrates me because it's like we're seeing industry come there, like global industry, and it's starting to really, over the last 15 years, it's really gained some traction. We've got Nissan, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, now Volvo. Like that's not insignificant.
BMW's Spartanville, South Carolina plant is the largest plant that BMW operates anywhere in the world.
Right.
It builds the X5, the X6, the X4, the X3, soon the X7. And
for export too, not just export.
They actually export more cars, more vehicles than they sell in the U.S. from Spartanburg.
Right. So that's people here building them. Like that's
they have made huge investments here. And somebody wants to throw tariffs on German cars.
Well, yeah, and there's that uncertainty about whether it's on the raw material or the finished part. And, because of the way parts round trip to become assemblies and then get delivered to the plant too, like there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think collectively the industry's kind of holding its breath.
I mean, what they're talking about, they've got tariffs that they want to put on the raw materials, on the steel and aluminum, but they're also talking about, an import tax, a border tax on the finished vehicles. So finished vehicles that they import from Europe and particularly from Germany. The president has made comments about wanting to get all the Mercedes off the streets of New York.
I have opinions which we will not delve into at the moment, but it just seems like the car business is probably not the one that you need to pick on.
Yeah.
At the moment, given the size of the industry in the United States and I don't know how deeply these guys who are trying to shape policy really understand that the sort of the tendrils of the auto industry go. It's a deep and wide kind of business that loops in a lot of other much smaller businesses that are still crucially important. Everything has to be manufactured: wiring looms, switches, seat covers, motors, like all of that stuff.
And a lot of those pieces go through a lot of different hands on the way from being raw materials to a finished product that's delivered to a customer.
Yeah.
You've got thousands of parts that go into a car, that are coming from, all over the world, and in a coordinated process, at least in most plants, in a coordinated process, being assembled into a vehicle. And we won't talk about the uncoordinated plant.
You just put a tent in the parking lot; it's fine.
Yeah, that's all you need.
But no, it's amazing. It's that should be one of our proudest industries, or like sort of proudest points, is just the way that industry works. Like they are logistics masters.
Oh yeah.
And it's just, when you start to really break it down, it's really amazing. The cars aside, just the way they get all the pieces where they need to go is very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, what Toyota has developed over the years with their the Toyota manufacturing system, that has largely been adopted by most manufacturers now. With just in time, there was somebody posted a a quote today on Twitter from the book The Toyota Way, which is published in 2004, which references the fact that in a Toyota assembly plant, from the time that a body comes out of the body shop, finished, painted, till the time it hits the assembly line, there's about a 4-hour gap in there. And in that time gap, orders are issued to suppliers, that typically, oftentimes are, these parts, these tier 1 suppliers that supply directly to the plants. They're usually located within an hour or two. Their own plants are located within an hour or two, and sometimes right next door to the assembly plants. So they'll issue orders and sequences for what parts they need in what color and what order they should come in. And they go directly from the supplier plant. They get built, so things like seats and instrument panels and door panels and everything else will get assembled in those supplier plants nearby. And in the span of that 3 or 4 hours between when a body in white comes out of the body shop and gets is painted till the time it hits the beginning of the assembly line, they will have all that stuff built, delivered, and sitting on a conveyor in the right sequence, so that when that car, so when a blue Honda Civic comes down the line, there will be black seats and black instrument panel and all the right combination of trim parts that are ready to just install without having to sort through and pick through and find the right parts to put in a particular car and make sure that you have everything matched up. It's all done already, unlike a certain other plant that we won't talk about today.
All right, before we devolve into that portion of the show, why don't we wrap it up? Unless there's something else we want to cover, but I mean,
I think the only other thing I wanted to touch on was the Ford buying the Michigan Central Station.
Oh yeah, we forgot about that. That's big news. That's huge news, actually. Yeah. We should talk about that before we wrap it up.
So here, here in the Detroit area, Detroit for the past couple of decades, has been home to a genre that has popped up on the internet called ruin porn. Because we've got, especially in the city of Detroit, there's so many, abandoned and derelict factories and other buildings, that have just been allowed to sit and rot for decades in some cases. There's this genre of stuff, people will go in and explore in these buildings and photograph them inside and take them, post them online. And one of the icons of this genre has been the Michigan Central Terminal, which is a train station that opened in 1913, just west of downtown Detroit in a neighborhood called Corktown. And the station closed in 1988. And it's been sitting empty and derelict ever since then, for 30 years now. And there have been all kinds of ideas floated about what to do with it over the years. And, as recently as 2009, the city council issued an order to begin demolition on it immediately. And that didn't happen for a variety of reasons. And so in the past week, I guess the process actually started around December of last year. The conversation started between Ford and the Maroon family that owns the train station and a whole bunch of other property in that area.
Yeah, so help me understand too. Like the Maroon family is not well liked, not everybody's favorite people.
They're pretty much despised by most people in Detroit.
Okay, why?
They made their fortune. Matty Maroon, the patriarch of the family, made his fortune in the trucking business, and over the years, bought up, lots of stuff around Detroit. He happens to own the Ambassador Bridge, which is the primary border crossing between Detroit and Windsor. And so he actually owns the border crossing. He collects the tolls. And so it's a giant mess. And he's for years they wanted to build a second bridge across the Detroit River. He wants to do it because he wants to control that border crossing. Several years back, the government of Ontario proposed that they would build a bridge, and they said, "We will build this bridge. We will pay for it, and we will let everybody use it." It will not cost the United States or the state of Michigan or the city of Detroit a dime. And, so this was approved in Canada. There was a vote here in Michigan to approve it. Michigan voters approved it overwhelmingly. The Maroons are still fighting this. In fact, earlier this week, they ran an ad on Fox and Friends, only on Fox and Friends, targeted directly at a certain resident of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, saying, you need to stop this bridge. You need to revoke the permits to build this bridge, because we shouldn't have another country controlling a border crossing. Should be my family that controls this border crossing. But anyway, so the Maroons have done nothing with this building since they bought it in, I think, 1992. It's just been sitting rotting, for many years, and it's directly visible from the bridge, for anybody coming into Detroit from Canada. This thing is sitting right there. It's an 18-story building. All the windows were gone. It's just this shell of a building, and it was because great architecture. It was a beautiful building, and so they did nothing with it until 2 years ago. They finally, the mayor's office got them to at least install some windows back into place, and so now Ford has bought the building. They actually bought another building a couple blocks away last fall, which is an old hosiery factory, which is now known just as the factory, which they refurbished that, and they moved what the group known as Team Edison, which is the team working on business models for autonomous and electric vehicles, into that building starting in March or April of this year. So they've got a couple hundred people working in that building. They bought the train station now, and they had a big celebration this past Tuesday to announce what they're doing. They're also buying a couple of other buildings in the area and some parcels of land. And they didn't get into a lot of specifics other than they're planning to move about 2,500 people into this building as they refurbish it over the next couple of years. And it's going to take a lot of work to refurbish it because a lot of stuff has crumbled over the years, but it's still, the structure itself is apparently still pretty solid, and so they're finally something's going to happen with it. And the interesting thing about it is in this particular area of Detroit, known as Corktown, the old Tiger Stadium was a couple blocks away from there. That's recently been that site has been turned into the Detroit Police Athletic League ball field. So they're using that for playing baseball again. There's been a lot of development going on in that area, a lot of new restaurants and stuff, but there's also still a lot of empty buildings, a lot of empty parcels of land along there. And I think what's probably going to happen is, Ford is moving a bunch of people in there. They're hoping to attract, some of their partners and other companies to set up shop in that area. And I think what they want to do is use this as sort of a canvas for trying out ideas for next generation mobility. One of the interesting things, is that the train line, this was the station for the Michigan Central Railway, and for decades, it was the primary way to get to Detroit for a lot of people. The train line still runs from the station directly through Dearborn and on west, right past the Ford headquarters campus in Dearborn, which is about 7 miles west of where the train station is. And, so there was some talk about, at some point they'd like to have a commuter rail system running between the train station and the main campus, and basically have this corridor of development along there. And what's interesting is this is not the first time that Ford has been involved in, some sort of revitalization project for Detroit.
No. I mean, General Motors benefited from that.
Yeah, in 1970, Henry Ford II, Bill Ford's uncle, started Detroit Renaissance, which was a nonprofit, which was, the goal was, to help revive the city of Detroit, in the wake of the late '60s riots and white flight and everything. And what that resulted in was the construction of the Renaissance Center, which at the time, when it opened in 1977, was basically a city within a city, which was part of the problem, because one of the things they did was they had these huge concrete berms, these 30-foot high concrete berms out front, on the Michigan Avenue side or the Jefferson Avenue side of the complex, that really kind of physically isolated the whole thing from the rest of Detroit. And the way the interior was designed, was, basically designed to isolate the whole place from the rest of Detroit instead of spurring development around it. It really did none of that. And things continued to decay around it until GM bought the Rensen, in the I think 1996. And they eventually made it their world headquarters.
Well, and I mean, that whole issue with the old, sort of that old attempt at revitalizing Detroit, it wasn't really genuine. Somebody was telling me about the Detroit airport. It's like, it was amazing. It's this beautiful thing, and it's just glass and just high tech and just really cool. I was like, yeah, you know why? Because executives from around the globe come in there, and then they get whisked away to wherever they need to go. So they see a nice airport, and then they see the offices. They don't see anything else in between. And that's sort of like that isolation approach. That's not helpful.
Yeah. So this time, instead of building something new from scratch, demolishing what's there and building something new from scratch, Bill Ford's approach, is completely different. Taking what has been an eyesore for decades and rehabbing that, and really trying to work with the community around it. Yeah. Whether or not this works, we'll see. I mean, it's going to take years to know whether it's successful, but, I think they're on the right track this time. I think this approach is more likely to work than what they did in the past, which was, what Detroit Renaissance did in the 1970s was very consistent with kind of what was being done with urban redevelopment all over the place in the 1970s, tear down the old stuff, build something new, and there was never really any connection between the old and the new. And this time, they're trying to bring in the new and integrate it with the old, turn this into, turn the train station into offices for high tech workers, put all their software teams in the train station, and attract a lot of other technology related businesses around it, and create this campus and this community, that's integrated with the community rather than isolated from it.
Well, yeah, they need to. They're based in Detroit. They sell cars because they're based in Detroit. They make hay out of that. They should give back to the community in some way and invest in the community where they are. So it's good to see. And I think that the separate campus thing may actually work to their benefit depending on how they set up the teams to work and stuff too. It sort of breaks you out of that somewhat hive mind culture. So.
Yeah, things like the vehicle product development teams, things like that. They'll stay in Dearborn, but they're getting a new campus as well. Ford is in the middle of rebuilding their product development center in Dearborn, and so they're getting all new offices there. And this is for a different group of people, but they're still going to be working together. And that's part of, I think, why they like the idea of the train station, why they talked about having the commuter trains running back and forth. And they've already started actually running, in recent weeks, since they moved people into the factory, which is the building a couple of blocks away. They've started running the Chariot service. We talked with the founder of Chariot way back when, one of the early episodes of the show. But, it's a microtransit service, on demand, shuttle buses running back and forth between Corktown and Dearborn. So they've got that going here now. And, I think we'll see them experimenting with a bunch of the other things, some of the things that they're trying in places like Miami and Pittsburgh, and also trying some new ideas here as well because, Detroit's got different issues. It's a different layout, it's different problems that they have to tackle. So I think they're going to be experimenting with a lot of this stuff in Corktown, to figure out what's going to work. And more importantly, trying to find business models that are going to be financially viable. Because the thing about, all the different mobility services that we've seen crop up in the last 7 or 8 years, with the ride hailing and car sharing and everything else, the one thing that nobody has figured out yet is how to make money on any of it.
Oh, maybe they should start by not
There's
discounting.
not a single one of these companies that's actually profitable.
Yeah, they should start by not making the rides too cheap. Charge what they cost.
Yeah, but then but then it's harder to attract people to use the service.
I know.
So you got to find that balance, and that's what they're trying to do, is figure out how do we use these vehicles in a way that is going to attract people to use it, but that's also going to be useful and be able to generate enough revenue to be profitable.
There will be change coming to Detroit, hopefully positive change. So that's good to see.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of, there's still a hell of a long way to go in Detroit, but in the 30 years I've lived in this area, I've seen more positive stuff happening in the last, 3-4 years than at any previous time.
Well, I mean, there you go. So if you say it, so shall it be. All right. I did not mean to prematurely wrap up the show. So I think we're at this point, we've exhausted our list of topics, and we can all move on to the next episode when that happens, which should be sometime soon.
We'll try to make that sometime this week.
Yeah, I won't be on airplanes this week. It should be a lot easier.
Neither will I. So got a couple of things going on locally, but got the Ford EcoSport that we can talk about next week. And
EcoSport or EcoSport?
EcoSport, whatever.
EcoSport with an Eco Boost.
Yeah. Actually, this one doesn't have an Eco Boost.
See? All right, and I think I'm going to an Acura RDX thing this week, so okay. I'll have that to talk about.
Maybe next week you can have your interview with Elliot Schneider as well.
Yeah. I will get to putting that together, and we'll get that up.
All right, we'll talk to you again soon.
All right,
bye.